How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you very much.
Good. Awesome. Let me just pull up my notes here. So first of all, I loved moving on. I thought it was such a important and well done story, one that we don't see very often. And of course, starring the great Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda. Did you know you always wanted to work with Lily again after her starring in 2015's Grandma and also in Admission?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Yeah, I did because when I hear her voice, like things start to happen for the character, and like I can really hear her voice. And also, like to me, there's something obviously really funny, but like her comedy seems to me to be rooted in like existentialism. Like there's something so like, oh yeah, this person actually sees how things work and how awful things can be, but still finds them funny and still finds people lovable. Um, she's really spectacular, and also like she seems like she could punch you in the face, um,
Yeah.
in a great way. Like and she's so loving. Like she has so much love. And so yeah, to me, like so when I hear her voice in a character, like so in this case, I've seen Lily around kids and I've seen like, you know, Jane's character is obviously dealing with this huge thing and like against the backdrop of history and of people's attitude towards assault. And but Lily's character also, like whenever I'm working with Lily in Grandma and in this too, I am thinking of sort of the progression mostly in terms of attitudes towards queerness. And but in this case, I was thinking, okay, so Lily had this great love of her life, which was her cello, which
Right.
she can no longer play. But also, I don't know whether Lily's character would have had kids or not. Now, if it was
Right.
now, it's more common for a gay woman to have kids, but possibly. And so I wanted to put her with all these like kids in the movie who like um, who like she's in a grandmother role towards,
Right.
um, and because her character, well, it's interesting. Actually, in Grandma, she plays someone who did have kids, a gay woman who had a kid. Yeah. So it's also, I mean, the way I tend to work too is that like I'll write something and then I'll give it to the actor and I'll say, does anything not make sense or is there anything that you want me to add? And they added like so much to this in terms of their character's history that I then put in the movie. Yeah, so sorry, I'm giving a long answer to your question.
You mentioned their input. In fact, I read in the press notes that Lily personally called you up and said, Jane wants you to make a movie with us, and I agree.
Yeah.
How did you settle on this particular story other than just like Lily's voice calling out to you?
Well, I had this image of a funeral where people are giving condolences to the widower and saying the things you say, like, we love you, come over for dinner, she's a wonderful woman. And then someone comes up and says, I'm going to kill you this weekend now that she's gone, and then moves on and he has to, um, so I had that one image and then I thought of Jane saying it and I was like, oh, I'd be scared if Jane Fonda said that to
Oh,
me.
yeah.
And then sort of I started thinking of it really like sort of as a Western. I can't remember if I put that in the notes or not, but like that she's got a compadre who she's had a falling out with, and
Yeah.
that person having her own entrance. Like Lily's, I want them to have entrances. So Lily's entrance in during Malcolm's eulogy was sort of the next thing that I thought of.
Right.
Um, and and then I just sort of started building it, like hearing their voices.
You mentioned the Western. In a way, like Jane is a sheriff coming back into town and looking for her own kind of brand of justice
100%.
against Malcolm McDowell's character. Um, what I really loved about his performance is that there is something very dark there, but it's almost, I use the word, sorry, my cat is joining the conversation. There's something almost cartoony about it in a way that doesn't feel completely evil or devoid of, this is a comedy. We don't want it to be like more real life. So my question for you is how did you help Malcolm craft that performance?
I mean, I knew how Malcolm was going to play it. I did a show with him called Mozart in the Jungle, and I've worked with him a lot. And Malcolm in real life he's a lovely person, but he's also an imp. Like he's like like he's and then also, you know, this was a role where I was like, oh, the iconography of him being Alex in Clockwork Orange is going to be great, because you're going to be like in the back of your head, this person did something awful. But I think that the thing is, yes, there are, you know, there are people who commit crimes who it seems like, oh, that's the kind of person who would do that in your head. But there's also people who commit crimes who are charming and really believe they've done nothing wrong.
Right.
And I think in the course of the movie, it starts to dawn on him. But I think that it's really dangerous it would be actually dangerous to have that character portrayed as like somebody who knows that they're bad from the get-go.
Right.
Because I don't think that's how people work. People justify themselves. And also he was a drunk. So, and also, as it turned out, like Jane had not met Malcolm, and in her head, he was Alex from Clockwork Orange, and
Right.
he wanted not to meet him until she filmed with him. So she asked me if it was okay if we didn't, you know, if I didn't introduce them. And so I did that. I kept them separate. Like I had Malcolm in one area and her in another for a couple of 3 days, until Malcolm, like, he was like starting to get his feelings hurt, and he was like, you know, he said to me, "People are going to ask what it was like working with Jane Fonda. I'm going to say I have no idea." And so then I said to Jane, you know, Malcolm's a little, you know, verklempt. Is it okay if I introduce you? And she said, "Oh yeah," and went over and gave him a hug. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. One thing I don't think I've seen a story like this before, where we talk about like trauma and sexual assaults and how it affects people throughout their entire lives, especially in older women. Can you talk about how you were able to channel that as a white man?
Sure.
Can you talk a bit about that? Yeah.
Well, first off, I think the most important thing is to approach things with humility. It's not my place to pontificate about anything.
Right.
The first way I would approach it is, I heard the characters saying and doing these things, and I wrote this thing, and so I now give it to Jane Fonda and say, how do you feel about this? Do you think this is honest? And we talk about it and arrive at something that she feels is honest. And if she feels like it's honest, then I'm okay in terms of my attitude towards the film. So, you know, I have, you know, my politics, which are apparent in Grandma and in this, but at the same time, it's like, I think it's, you know, there's various versions of mansplaining.
Yeah.
And so it's, to me, to some degree, like, to shut the hell up.
You just brought up Grandma. Moving On kind of feels like almost like a spiritual sequel to Grandma. Was that, and not just because of Lily Tomlin, obviously, was that something that you like deliberately thought about, or did it just naturally happen like that?
I mean, it has a similar scale, and it's happening in a compressed, it's both movies are something that's happening within a day or 2 days in this case,
Right.
but that are sort of exploring the whole of a character's life. And because the character's in their 80s, it's dealing in questions of feminism,
Right.
and in this case, queer history as well. And so, yeah, there is a similarity. I mean, tonally, this is a little maybe wilder, a little close to the vest, a little less close to the vest. But also, it's about women who are really tough. You know, I mean, in Grandma, I guess the most heightened thing is Lily Tomlin hits Nat Wolff's character in the balls with a hockey stick. And that's something that could happen in this movie too. So yeah, and look, this is nice in that it's about friendship. It was about some perception I had about Lily and Jane's friendship, and that there are people who are, you know, who have been through so much and seen so much, that have this like childish love for each
Yeah.
other.
Well, it's a beautiful, beautiful film. And I really appreciate you spending this time with me. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad you saw it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for checking out the show. If you like what we're laying down, please subscribe to our channel and click the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest stuff.